podcast. This is episode 3. It's titled, God Gave Me One More Chance Again. Since God is forever forgiving, why wouldn't it give me one more chance again? Now, before we get into any of the heavy details, please like, subscribe, favorite, or follow this podcast. And please, if you can, share it with someone you know or someone that you believe might be in need of something like this that could potentially change their lives. Now, my hardest times in life brought me to my knees hundreds of times. I guess they don't call it hard times for nothing, right? Now, there's several kind of cliches out there for us to grab onto, like the famous one, you get knocked down, you get back up again, or hard times for hard people. Hard times don't last forever. You never know how strong you are until being strong is all you have left. Or how about if you're going through hell, just keep going. Hard times make you bitter or better. Tough times never last. Tough people do. So the funny thing is, we believe that we have to experience these hard times in order to be happy or fulfilled or something eventually. We think that having these scars helps us to be tougher or stronger. We think that we need to go through hell to get to heaven. All of those sound like really good, but they aren't the truth. They are good starts, but they aren't the truth. So here's a concept for you to bite on, or not. From all over the world for thousands of years, the following things have been true. God is love. God is peace. God is joy and abundance. God's not hate. God isn't revenge. God isn't anger, despair, or, God isn't a liar. So if God is love, peace, joy, abundance, and all of that, how can we see God as things like war, hate, anger, politics, or anything but love? We see God that way in order to help us continue to walk the path of this human insanity. Our egoic brain wants us to hold on to the human things so that we don't see the divine within us. It's almost like it's trying to prevent us from seeing the truth so that we can't feel the holiness that we truly are. Because in reality, folks, God is love, and God made us in its image as the light of God. So how could we even consider a concept like hate, anger, war, and so on? There must be some sort of disconnect between what we are and what we think we are. That's why I'm calling it the human insanity. So in several ways, insanity can be defined as extreme foolishness and irrationality. And I did a little research. I found law.com. It defines insanity as this. Insanity is a mental illness of such a severe nature that a person cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. They cannot conduct their affairs due to psychosis or is subject to uncontrollable impulsive behaviors. So, once again, if God is only love, how can God be hate? Human insanity. In a state of believing something, we'll certainly trust that what we believe is true, and anything that's outside of that belief is got to be false. So, back to the question again. If we believe God is love, how can we believe that God is hate, or anything but love? I think it stems from things that we've been told over the last 2,000 years or so by scholars and priests and religious people. Since the writing of Moses, this planet has basically assumed that God has a wrath, and that anytime we do such fiendish, foolish things, that God's going to come down with fire and brimstone and destroy us. I mean, didn't he do that to Noah? The great flood. Sodom and Gomorrah was burned with sulfur and flame. God's wrath. Now, for most of my life, I was actually a believer that God could do bad things to good people because I believed I was a good person. And I had a ton of bad things seeming to happen to me. Maybe I was a good person to some extent, but when I had bad things happen to me, I chose not to take responsibility for my part in any of it. Instead, I chose to place blame on everyone and anything else, including me, for anything that happened to me. Now listen, folks, if you caught what I just said, I stated that I chose not to take responsibility for my part in any of it. Yet I also stated that I placed blame on myself. So how's that possible? Are they the same thing? To me, today, they really aren't the same thing. They're similar, but they're not the same. If I were in a dark place, more than likely, they would seem the same. They would affect me the same. So what makes them different? Well, real simple, folks. Placing blame is a negatively driven thought. whereas taking responsibility is a mature act of ownership to my actions. It means I'm willing to own up to my part in whatever it was that happened. If I place blame, I'm trying to remove myself from taking part in any of it. Now, back to the previous question. If we believe God is love, how can it be hate? God can't be hate because our 3D self, this human insanity, has created the concept of hate. How do I know this? Simple. If God is only love, God can't be hate. If God can't be hate, how did we get hate? If you've heard my previous podcast called My Awakening, you'd probably begin to understand what I believe to be the truth about being human versus being the light of God. Somewhere, the light of God, us, believed that we were separate from God, and we created a veil sort of thing, a separating thing, to make it seem like we were separate from God. We then created this human being concept, ruled by this other thing called the ego. You know, that little voice in our heads that tends to direct us towards negativity and trying not to reconnect with God. So once we sunk into that, we'll call it a dream of being separate, because thinking we could be separate is like being in a dream. It's not real, but it certainly appears to be. But anyway, in this dream state that we are in, we chose to have guilt, shame, regrets, and all sorts of unhealthy emotions that kept us from returning to the hand of God. Within those moments, we also created this thing called hate, a human emotion describing our level of fear. Fear of what? Well, at its deepest core, it's a fear of being separate from God, but we'll use anything else to describe it. Things like, I don't like what you're doing. I can't stand hearing you talk. You treat me like garbage. You don't love me. You aren't very nice to anyone. I'm stuck behind you in traffic. You can't seem to get your change out fast enough at the register. You don't vote like I did. You're homeless. You know, there's tons of reasons that we can put hate into our life. And hate is not a divine feeling. Now, it's okay if you don't want to follow that concept I just ran by you. I get it. It's not an easy concept to believe in. It's definitely not trending yet on social media. Yet. What I hope we can agree on is that hate isn't a healthy emotion to carry regardless of how you think it originates. So keeping with the concept of needing to experience hard times so we can see how great the good times are, that's a thought process that doesn't include God. Let me explain. It's kind of repeating itself here. If God is only love, then how can scars be a product of God? How can getting knocked down be of God? How are hard times filled with God? We add God in it because we don't want to see that we made choices through free will. We don't want to take responsibility for our actions or decisions that brought us to those hard times. We prefer to share blame and shame in any and every direction, including God. I mean, folks, I was the king of blaming God when I was in my dark times. Now, we tend to ask God to get us out of those hard times, or to at least remove the scars for us. Yet God doesn't even see them. God only knows love. It sees us purely as light. God only knows the real you, the divine you. The great thing is, we get to choose God to assist us in our healing from that human insanity. We can choose any or all aspects of God. The Divine Mother, it's like the coddler of us, and the one to guide us through this in every lifetime. Or the Divine Father, to show us the direct way home to God. Or angels, to watch over us and guide us to the righteous choices. Or saints, you name it. There's gazillion things that we can use that are aspects of God. That free will that got us into trouble can also be used to keep us from dark times or unhealthy choices. We just have to make sure that we don't use the same dysfunctional brain that got us into dark places in the first place. We need to make sure our heart and beliefs are in alignment with a healing, healthy self. Be in alignment with being a child of God. You are deserving of healing, having happiness, peace, joy. All right, so now that we've gone slightly off topic, let's talk about what it took for me to know that God gave me one more chance again. First off, I'm here talking to you. That's a pure sign that God gave me another chance again. If you've heard any of my previous podcasts, you'll know I went to dark places several times in my life, and each time there was something that assisted me out. At one time, I put a gun to my mouth and had the lever cocked and ready with my finger on the trigger of a .365 Magnum, only to have a soft voice tell me to take my finger off the trigger and that I'd be on my way to healing. Another time, I found the perfect place to drive my car off the road and sink deep into a rugged river with me in it, only to have that sudden pause happen, and I somehow convinced myself it wasn't quite the best spot to do it. Another time, I was found in a mental and emotional coma, shutting down from life and everything around me in the basement of my home during the turmoil of a marriage breakdown. But shortly after that, I was enrolled in a cognitive awareness therapy system, and that ended up changing my life, which I now provide some 20 years later for other people. It's a modified version of the same course called Cognitive Awareness with a Touch of God. Another time, there was this serious problem I had. I was being attacked by hackers, identity thieves. I was being fooled by a group of deceivers and by people that had ugly intentions, and they threatened every aspect of my life and my family. And yet I was able to stumble through my giving up and find what I called my last chance here in Sedona, Arizona. And now I'm able to share my wisdom with anyone and everyone willing to find healing in their lives from their dark times. So through those few scenarios I just shared, God came to me each time and provided me with that subtle touch from its hand on my shoulder, letting me know it isn't quite time yet and that I've been given another chance again. God isn't going to quit on us. God doesn't have some sort of human agenda for us. Other than, for us to love God, love ourselves, and love others. And ultimately, to just come home and stop being separate. Our responsibility is to walk each day as if we're representing God's grace and love to everyone we see, and to do good things for others anytime the moment arises, not just when we feel like it. So when things go dark, you gotta know it's driven by our own choices and how we've reacted to certain situations presented to us every day. And those things get us to where we are now. By using our broken belief system mixed with dysfunctional thoughts and actions, we stumble into darkness as often as we believe we need to. What kind of life do you want? It's up to us to create something wonderful or something not so wonderful. It's all about the choices we make every moment of every day. There's kind of a common phrase. You've heard of it, I know it. We can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. It's our choice. What are we going to do today when the next moment arises? When the next tough time shows up in front of us? What are we going to do? What is your choice going to be? I think it's time that we work together on creating something wonderful instead of something not so wonderful. What do you think? All right, folks. Thank you very much for listening into my podcast once again. I appreciate your time and effort and your energy, your love especially. It's always a pleasure for me to share my information, my knowledge, my past, my healing with you. I look forward to having you listen into my next podcast. Thank you very much. God bless you all. Talk to you soon.